She laughed while announcing our divorce at a charity gala. But her smile disappeared when she realized the prenup left me with 75% of everything. My name is Alexander, and I am 45. Just a few weeks ago, my entire world shifted, not because I was left broken, but because the person who thought she held all the power discovered that she had no idea what she was up against. My wife, Victoria, who is 42, believed she could blindside me with a public announcement, humiliate me in front of others, and then walk away with my money, my efforts, and my security. She was so certain that I would collapse into tears, begging her to reconsider, offering her anything she wanted to keep our marriage intact. But she forgot one very important thing. I am a practical man who had prepared long ago for exactly this kind of betrayal. The scene unfolded at one of those stiff, pretentious charity galas that I had never particularly enjoyed attending. My presence there was always because of Victoria's best friend, Heather, a woman who lived for glittering lights, expensive dresses, and the chance to be seen. That night, Victoria had consumed more than a few glasses of champagne, her smile bright, almost wild, and her voice louder than usual. When the music softened and conversations around us fell quiet, she turned to me with that sharp, artificial smile that always preceded trouble. "Darling," she said, using that word she reserved only when she wanted to cut me deep. "I've been meaning to tell you something. I want a divorce. I'm finally going to be free of you." And then she laughed. A high, ringing laugh that echoed through the circle of people around us. The laughter wasn't joyful. It was mocking, cruel, and designed to break me in front of others. The room fell into an awkward silence, acquaintances avoiding eye contact, unsure whether to comfort her or to console me. Heather's expression flickered with shock before she composed herself into a look of faux concern, the kind reserved for someone pretending to care while secretly relishing the drama. But I did not react the way she expected. I did not plead, cry, or beg for an explanation. I simply lifted my glass of club soda, took a calm sip, and gave her a steady smile. "Indeed, Victoria," I said, "perhaps you will be free." Her laughter faltered. She had imagined a performance, me collapsing into heartbreak while she played the role of the strong woman finally freeing herself. Instead, she was met with indifference, a wall she could not climb. The lack of drama disarmed her entirely, and the people around us shifted uncomfortably, unsure what to make of a husband who did not seem shattered by his wife's declaration. The ride home was cold, a heavy silence filling the car as she stared at me with eyes full of anger. Her voice, sharp with frustration, cut through the darkness. "Well, aren't you going to say anything? Beg? Plead? Try to convince me to stay?" I turned my head slowly, meeting her gaze. "Victoria, you said you want a divorce. You seemed quite happy when you announced it. Why would I beg you to stay when you are so eager to be free?" Her scoff was loud, dripping with arrogance. "Don't think this means you're getting off easy. My lawyer will be in touch. I expect a very generous settlement after everything I've put up with." And there it was, the narrative she loved to use. The story that she had suffered through a decade beside me, tolerating a life that she believed she deserved more from. What she conveniently ignored was the truth. 10 years ago, when we married, I was already running a moderately successful software company, while she was a part-time yoga instructor with debts piling up faster than she could pay them. I loved her then, truly, but I was also a man who learned from his father's mistakes. My father's divorce had been messy, brutal, and financially devastating. So I had insisted on a prenup, not out of lack of love, but out of a simple need for protection. That prenup was ironclad. If she ever chose to end the marriage without proven fault on my part, infidelity or abuse, neither of which ever happened, then I would retain 75% of all assets acquired during the marriage, along with 100% of everything I owned before we said our vows. She would still leave with a quarter of the marital assets and all her personal belongings. It had been a fair agreement at the time, especially considering her financial standing. She signed it after having independent legal counsel, a lawyer I paid for, review it with her. The next morning, her threat became reality. A sleek envelope arrived from a prestigious law firm, Douglas Aaron and Associates. Inside was a demand for half of everything, along with lifelong alimony and our primary residence. A typical aggressive opening move. I merely scanned the letter, made a copy for my records, and forwarded it to my own lawyer, Peter Thorne. Peter was a man who thrived on cases like these. Cold, calculated, and brilliant in his field, he had a reputation for devouring opposing counsel and spitting them out without mercy. My instructions to him were simple. Enforce the prenup to the letter and do not allow a single piece of communication to pass outside of official channels. Soon after, Victoria tried to circumvent the process. She sent me a text, demanding an explanation about the prenup nonsense. I did not reply. Instead, I sent the screenshot to Peter, adding a note for him to remind her counsel that all communications must go through them. Then I blocked her number. If she wanted lawyers involved, she would get exactly that, and nothing else. For the next few days, silence from her was golden. But I knew that peace wouldn't last. Reality, when it finally settled on her, would burn. And oh, did it burn. The silence from Victoria lasted only a short time. When the reality of the prenup truly sank in, she shifted into panic. Her lawyer, Mr. Douglas, tried to play the role of aggressor, throwing around words like emotional distress and coercion. But my lawyer, Peter, calmly reminded him that Victoria had received independent legal advice a decade ago before signing. There was no distress. There was no coercion. She had read it, understood it, and signed it. That piece of paper had teeth, and it was not going anywhere. But of course, Victoria was not the type to accept defeat quietly. She enlisted reinforcements. The first call came from her mother, Janet, a woman who had always believed that her daughter deserved a life of luxury, preferably one paid for by someone else. Her voice trembled with outrage as she spoke. Alexander, I am appalled, truly appalled. After everything Victoria has given to this marriage, you are going to wave that piece of paper in her face and leave her with nothing. I kept my voice calm and steady. Janet, that piece of paper is a legal agreement that Victoria signed willingly. She will leave with exactly what was agreed upon, 25% of our assets. That amount is far from nothing. Janet's tone rose sharply. But she built a beautiful home. She stood beside you. You cannot be so cold. Janet, I replied, this is no longer a matter for family conversations. It is a legal matter. All concerns should be directed through our lawyers. And with that, I ended the call. Not long after, Heather, Victoria's lifelong ally and chief enabler, cornered me at the gourmet grocery store we both frequented. She wore an expression of righteous anger, her voice a mixture of condescension and pleading. Alexander, how could you be so cruel to Vicky? She's heartbroken. She's confused. And this prenup nonsense is insulting. Surely, you still love her enough to fight for her. I met her gaze without a flicker of doubt. The only thing insulting, Heather, was Victoria laughing in my face while announcing our divorce in public. She wanted lawyers involved, and that is exactly what she has. This matter will be handled by legal channels only. Heather huffed, muttered something about me being cold-hearted, and stormed off toward the cheese section. I had no doubt that she would report back to Victoria within the hour. The next proposal from Victoria's lawyer arrived shortly after. They were now graciously willing to settle for 40% of the assets, plus temporary spousal support of $20,000 a month while she rebuilt her life. The entitlement was astonishing. Peter's response was swift and brutal. We reiterate our client's position regarding the binding prenuptial agreement. No further negotiations will be entertained. That night, as I packed her belongings into boxes, I looked around the house at the endless collection of designer clothes, unworn shoes, and decorative items. Each item spoke of a life she had built without ever considering the cost, because she never had to. She believed she would always be protected, always provided for, regardless of her behavior. But now, for the first time, she was facing a reality where her choices carried consequences. Days passed, and then the dirty tricks began. First came the anonymous calls at night, unknown numbers, quick hang-ups. Then, one evening, 2 police officers arrived at my door, responding to a report of a domestic disturbance. I welcomed them in, explained that my wife and I were separated, and that all communication was through lawyers. They looked around, found nothing, and apologized for the inconvenience. I took down the incident number and forwarded it to Peter immediately. The next attack came in the form of an email to my company's HR department, accusing me of being unstable and using company resources to manage my divorce. My boss called me in, showed me the email and said, "This smells like nonsense, but HR has to follow up." Within 48 hours, after reviewing my performance records, the case was closed. Another point of harassment logged for Peter's file. But perhaps the most revealing moment came during the discovery process. Peter called me, his voice calm but laced with amusement. "Good news," he said. "Victoria conveniently forgot to declare a diamond tennis bracelet valued at $50,000 that you purchased for her last year. We'll be addressing this omission." That careless move spoke volumes about who she was, someone who believed rules did not apply to her. She thought she could hide assets, twist facts, and still come out ahead. But the law does not bend to entitlement. A few days later, she took her desperation a step further. She arrived at my house with her sister Rachel, pounding on the door while I was on a work call. When I finally opened the door, leaving the chain on, her voice was already rising. "Alexander, you have to stop this. This isn't fair. I'll have nothing." I kept my voice calm, though my patience was wearing thin. "Victoria, you know this conversation is inappropriate. All communication must go through our lawyers. If you do not leave my property immediately, I will call the police." Rachel tried to interject, pleading on her sister's behalf. But I cut her off firmly. If Victoria is distressed, she must communicate through legal channels. Goodbye. Then I closed the door, locked it, and called Peter to document the incident. From that moment on, I realized something important. My revenge was not going to be loud or dramatic. It would not be about screaming or public confrontations. My revenge was cold, methodical, and rooted in the simple enforcement of logic and law. She wanted freedom. She wanted to dictate the terms. But she was learning that when you play with contracts, you cannot ignore the fine print. Weeks passed, and the pressure campaign slowly collapsed. Mr. Douglas, likely exhausted by his client's entitlement and poor decisions, finally sat her down for a harsh dose of reality. The attempt to contest the prenup ceased. The harassment stopped. Even her allies grew quiet. Heather's gossip lost its flavor when there was no meltdown to feed on. Finally, the divorce was settled exactly as written. 75% of the assets came to me. 25% went to her. She left with jewelry, clothes, and a settlement worth 7 figures, enough to live comfortably if she was sensible, though I had my doubts. Reports later reached me that she had poured much of it into a flashy penthouse and a lifestyle she could not sustain. She was posting pictures online, trying to reinvent herself as a lifestyle influencer, but the cracks were already showing. Admirers asked what she actually did for a living. The irony was thick. The woman who laughed while announcing her freedom was now free of me, yes, but she was also free of the lifestyle I had built, the stability I had maintained, and the security she had taken for granted. Her laughter that night at the gala had been the peak of her delusion. Everything that followed was a scramble, a desperate attempt to reclaim power that she never truly held. As for me, I moved on. My house grew quieter, lighter. I began dating again, this time, a woman who was independent, a successful architect with a career she loved. She saw me as a partner, not a wallet. For the first time in years, I felt peace. And that, in the end, was the sweetest victory. Not her suffering, but her realization that she had lost because of her own choices. Not because I cheated or lied or betrayed her, but because she tried to play a game she could never win. She thought she was playing chess while I was playing checkers, but the truth was, I had already learned the rules of the game long before she sat at the table.